Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
I always like to know about people when they're on the radio shows here. And even though maybe their profession or their business is a little different, it's always amazing to me what little things happen, and then we hear this story. So I said to our next guest, Tomas Steg, who is actually he's a cemetery broker, and he's a very interesting man. So I said, where did you get the name Tomas, Tomas, because he is not Spanish.
No.
And he has a story to tell, which is really special. Would you share that with our listening audience, please?
Sure, Anita. My parents were rounded up in the concentration camp, and my father survived because he was able to shave the SS guards, and he was a barber and a beautician. My mother survived because she was in another camp, and she was a very good cook. So they both had jobs, and neither one knew that the other one was still alive at the end of the war. And in 1945, when they were freed, their friends and relatives told them, "Oh, I saw your wife and I saw your husband," and they got back together again. I was born in Czechoslovakia in 1947, and then I came to the United States with my parents in 1948. And the reason I got the name Tomas is because the president of Czechoslovakia, his name was Tomas Masaryk, and he was a good president, sort of like John F. Kennedy, and they asked all the boys to be named in his honor.
So there are a lot of Tomases, I have to assume.
Yes.
Do you know anyone else like
No,
this?
No,
this is just one of those flukes.
Actually, it's more of a Spanish name. I've run across people with that name, but they're Spanish heritage, whatnot. Yeah.
And another question I'm going to ask you, because
Sure.
I know that you have probably told us, but for people who maybe didn't hear the last show when you spoke, how did you get into the cemetery brokerage business?
Well, actually, I was an employee of the cemetery for 25 years, pre-need sales, and I was the top salesman at my company, Star of David. In addition to being the top salesman, I formed 20 Orthodox sections for the different synagogues. And when I left there in 2013, I decided to go on my own. So I'm licensed by the state of Florida as a reseller of burial rights. And because I accumulated a vast portfolio of burial spots, I can offer them at a 20% discount for people looking to buy one. The only restriction is that people need to be Jewish, and if they want an Orthodox section, I can help them as well. You know.
So now we know there are a lot of mixed marriages. What do you do about that?
Well, I have a special section for them. They can't go into the regular Jewish-only sections, but we do have provisions for them. No one's left out.
Right.
So.
And South Florida is perfect for you here, isn't it? I mean, you couldn't go to Atlanta, Georgia, probably, and have this kind of a business. So
there's a large population of retired Jewish people, and the idea is for me to see them before the time is too late. Everyone is guaranteed to use this at some point in their life, and the rabbis say that it's a segula. Segula is a Hebrew word for lucky charm. It's better to make the arrangements ahead of time and not need them than to need them and not have them.
And how do you spell that word?
Segula, Segulah. That's the English spelling, and I find that most people are at ease with it. Once the arrangements are made, it's simply a phone call at the time, and it saves people money, aggravation, and doesn't leave the choices up to the children, but the choices were already made by the parents. So everything is followed with the prior arrangements.
And I may have said this to you last time, but I do remember years ago, like my grandparents, they belonged to associations or something because they had, that's the first thing they had
Right.
when they got married, right? How
Right.
did that work?
Well, for example, when my parents came to the United States, they also belonged to a burial society, and they met once every 2 or 3 months, and they kept all the members together in a certain section at the cemetery, and it also made things easier for when people needed it later on.
Yeah, so that's the big point that you did say, Tomas, is that it's not real. It's really for their families, and it's really to do what they want. A lot of times, a family would come in and say, and we talked about the cremation. They'd say, "Well, just cremate my father, cremate my mother." Well, that's not what they would have wanted.
Correct.
But so, isn't it a good security to have it all done ahead of time, and then you get what you want?
Correct. And people have the opportunity to pay it off over time with no interest. So we try to make it as easy as possible.
And who knows where all those cemetery plots are? Where's the record kept for that?
Well, the records are kept within each cemetery. There is no general listing of them. In other words, if you make arrangements through a particular cemetery, for example, Star of David, you're given a deed by that cemetery, and your plot is identified as plot number 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's like buying a final condominium, but it's something you're guaranteed to use. It's not like buying a television or a car that you have to keep on buying new ones. Once it's bought, it's in place. And right now I'm making arrangements for a man who's 99 years old.
He's making the arrangements, right?
He's making the arrangements.
It's about time.
About time. The man has a wonderful sense of humor, and God blessed him with good years. He's 99, his wife is 96.
Oh, how lovely.
And he's also making plans for a child who's unmarried, who was 62. So the three of them are going to be together.
Now, that's a very nice story. That's right. And
Yeah.
so they'll all be, now they could they go where this is? It's all identified?
Yes. In other words, mother has grave number 1, father grave number 2, the son is going to grave number 3 when his time comes.
Do they have a choice of the location in the cemetery?
Sure. There are wide choices. Some people who are not as religious as others choose above ground burial in a mausoleum. It's not allowed in the Orthodox religion because the person has to be embalmed, which means they cut the femoral artery and they drain blood. They put embalming fluid in. Number 2, you're put on a shelf system in a mausoleum, and Jewish law requires you to be in the ground. You come from the dust, you return to the dust.
Yes, but they are in coffins. So
Yes,
I mean,
they're in a casket,
Yes.
and the casket is further encased in a concrete liner because Florida has high water tables and soft soil, so that when you come to a cemetery, everything is looks like a park-type setting, and you don't have the hills and valleys. If these caskets were only in the ground and they were deteriorating and falling apart actually, then you would have every 2 feet you'd have a indentation in the ground, and it wouldn't have the aesthetic appeal that it has.
So now talk about the difference. I had the responsibility. I went with my mother when she was choosing her coffin, and of course,
Why down here? Because number 1, this becomes the Shiva house. The children come down to the parent who survives. Now, in most cases, the man goes first because he's a little older and broken down. we make a joke about it that the man goes because he wants to.
oh, that's all right. We won't go further with that.
Okay.
Actually, I'd be surprised. There are a lot of men living longer than their wives
Well-
live nowadays. Their wives have been taking such good care of them, right?
Well, if you go to an average restaurant on a Sunday afternoon, you'll see 10 women and 2 men.
Yes,
So
right.
that's
And those 2 men, I have to tell you, they are in trouble because those women that day, right? They've
yes.
got
The
food.
women chase
Oh my goodness!
the men that are left behind, because that's the way it is. Yeah.
You know, I remember, Tomas, I know it's off the subject in a way of what you do, but, you know, people get to know you and they're going to want to do things with you. But I had a grandmother who lived in New York, then came to Miami Beach, and she wound up marrying 3 men. I mean, you know, one died, the next one.
Right.
And, I mean, it's amazing when you think about that she must have had such chutzpah to be able to do that, right?
Well,
she was a good cook, I guess.
No one wants to be alone.
No, that's right.
And, you know, especially in the older years, my mom, I lost my father a number of years ago, and then my mother, who was still alive, got together with a neighbor who lost his wife, and because no one wants to be alone.
So they were happy, though.
They were happy. They were
Wasn't
married
that
for another
nice?
10 years.
Really?
Until he passed away, yeah.
Wow. So that is nice. But getting back to, of course, what you do, and it's so important for people who really want to make sure that the burial goes smoothly and all. Do you do anything else, or you just sell the property? Tell me what else you do.
No,
it seems like you're very kind and sweet. You must get involved, I can tell you.
I am involved.
I know, I feel that.
From the time that people come to me, I attend every funeral that I'm involved in. So over the last 30 years, whether someone made arrangements 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or 2 weeks ago, and someone passes away, I'm called for every funeral. I make sure that everything is done properly and according to the client's wishes, and I talk them through the process of meeting with the funeral home, all the paperwork, and even after the funeral, I attend Shiva homes, and I help the families with preparation of the memorial stones. So I'm there from beginning to end, really.
Yeah, that's very special. You've been in the business a long time, so you certainly know what you're doing, and people will have a lot of confidence in you. I can see that. I had another question about, so when someone does pass away, they want to have, let's say they didn't buy anything ahead of time. Now the family buys something, but they want to have more land, but maybe it's not available.
Well, I have different areas that I can reserve property for extended family members, and just like my parents made arrangements many years ago, the family members have an opportunity to be buried with their parents, even though they may not use their plot for 30 or 40 years.
Right.
Once they reserve the plot next to mom or dad, it's theirs. It's like buying an apartment. It stays empty, but when the time comes, children tend to want to be together with their parents.
Right, and I'm thinking about where I work with elder law attorneys, and I know there's a lot of complications when someone dies and they haven't put this into their will. And they really should, shouldn't they? Tell people when they're filling out a will. I don't think a lot of people put this into their will.
Well, after a person makes arrangements, they should notify their attorney that they have pre-need arrangements, and so that everything will go smoothly at the end. But usually there's one spouse remaining, and that spouse makes the phone call. Within 2 hours of making a phone call, the deceased person is picked up, and he's brought into the care of the funeral home, and their file is taken out, and according to whatever they chose earlier, that's what's put in place. And the idea is to keep the financial burden to a minimum, because if a person doesn't make plans and suddenly you have a death, many funeral homes tend to charge a different price list. In other words, the very same items that you can buy ahead of time at a reduced price, now you're paying a premium because the family has no choice. You know? And you can't go shopping. You need to bury mom or dad. And what happens is that if there are 3 siblings, they all throw their credit cards on the table and say, okay, whatever has to be paid is paid, and where do I sign? You know?
You're so right, because someone told me that her husband had passed away, and she was down Jewish cemetery, and the cost was something like $20,000. I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe this!"
Yeah.
Because he didn't make any arrangements.
Didn't make any arrangements. It's
doesn't seem fair, though, really.
No, it doesn't seem fair, but you're guaranteed to use this, so it makes good sense to plan it. Just the way you plan your entire life, this is another subject that has to be addressed. By putting your head in the sand doesn't make it go away, because that day will come, And if you have mazel, that day will come later. And if you don't have mazel, you need mazel to live, and you need mazel to die. When my mother came time for her to pass, she came to my house for dinner. I had dinner with my children, went home. She told me she didn't feel well. I told her, should I come over? She said, no, you come over in the morning and take me to the doctor. And my mother had her senses, and she lived by herself after my father died. She was able to cook and clean, whereas most people, when they're older, lose their faculties, and they rely upon a nursing home to take care of them. But it's so much easier if things are in order and things go smoothly.
So the story was the next morning.
Next morning I went to my mom, and she was asleep in her bed, and that's mazel, because she didn't suffer. She didn't spend 10 years laying in a bed in a nursing home waiting for someone to wipe her and would feed her.
Yes.
And that's no life. That's no quality of life.
But she did. She was lucky she had a son and someone who lived close enough.
Yes.
That was able to, because there are a lot of people who are found that way.
Right.
For a long time, because maybe somebody just noticed they never came down.
Well, what we do is, if children live up north or in a different state or a different city, I always give them an identification card, and these people usually clip it onto the refrigerator, so if a person is found in their apartment, at least the police or someone sees a note on the refrigerator, I have my arrangements at such and such a place.
Be careful, but don't put this burden on your family, or sometimes there's no family, and just people decide what to do with you, but don't do that. Get something, listen, you fill out a will, you fill out a trust, do the right thing for yourself so you know that you're going to have what you want to have. Tomas, I want to talk about and I know that Orthodox people will not want this, but there's really, the whole thing about cremation has risen so much. Talk about that, would you?
Well, number one, cremation is, when you look at the dollars, it's a fraction of what a burial is today, and that's why many people lean towards that. The Jewish religion forbids it, and when you look at the dollars, it's probably about 10% of what a normal burial will be. So many people feel that they don't want to, they'd rather leave money to their children, or many people don't have the money to start with. There are many people who live month to month on a fixed income, and they rely upon that monthly check to get through the month. They don't have a few $1,000s to put on the side. But fortunately, I'm involved with many different organizations, so even if finances are a problem, I direct them to different organizations that will properly give them a proper traditional burial.
That is so lovely. Wow. So you're really the whole thing. You're like holistic, as we say, that you can help people no matter what their problem is.
Right.
Let's talk about children passing away. How different is it? Little ones. Let's talk about babies.
That's the most difficult part of the burial, because no parent wants to ever bury a child. At the cemetery, we do have a section called Babyland.
Oh, you do?
It's smaller. The average plot is 3.5 feet by 8 feet long, but in Babyland it's probably 2 feet by 2 feet. And unfortunately, throughout the years, I've met many families that either had a stillborn child or a child who dies during the first few months of existence. And what's also troubling is the amount of older children, teenagers, and young adults who either through recklessness of car accidents or drug use, they have passed away in the past.
And so it is harder. I was thinking even just the babies. So it's called Babyland. That's very beautiful. And that's at all the cemeteries.
Most cemeteries have a little area cordoned off for that, and then families are given the opportunity to put a small stone marking the spot.
Even though they may want them to be where they're going to be, but that's a different. It's a lot. It's different.
It's usually young people having babies, so they don't want to think of their own cemetery needs for 50 years later down the road. So we have a special area called Babyland.
Okay, and we keep moving along. I need to give a phone number out for you so that people can, call you and then, talk to you. See, the one thing about Tomas Steg is that he's really a counselor. I mean, when you call him, he's not going to just sell you the cemetery plot. He's going to talk to you about a lot of things. So, and it's a free consultation. It's the phone number is 954-557-8439. That's 954-557-8439. He buys, he sells cemetery lots and mausoleums, but he really is very kind and very loving, and I think it's important. He has some cemetery that he works with at Star David, Eternal Light, Mount Nebo, Miami, Beth David, Lakeside, Menorah Gardens, Mount Nebo in Kendall, and Bethel. It's really a wonderful thing to have him here, especially on our show. It's very different for me. I have never had anyone like Tomas on here, and this is very, very good because we have so many listeners who are Jewish, and especially recently I've had so many Holocaust victims on my show. It's amazing. They've either written books or they come on with their family. I'll tell you one story, Tomas, that I had a brilliant plastic surgeon who's here in Boca Raton, and his father also was I think he was a plastic surgeon or something, and I had both of them on the show. And it was amazing. We were talking about it, and his father started talking about he was in the Holocaust, and his son said he never talked about it before, and that was the first time that he talked about it.
Well, in most Jewish homes, it's talked about. Parents don't keep it bottled up. I mean, they were able to survive. They share it with their children, and that's an unusual circumstance where someone didn't talk about it.
In the family, well, but they don't like to talk about it on the outside many times because they say it's just too painful.
Yes. I had a brother and a sister that were killed during which my parents had 2 other children. I was born after the war, but my brother and sister were hiding out with a family, and they were found 2 weeks before the end of the war.
Oh my heavens! Oh yeah, so you feel a lot of this. I see that. Tomas, you were so good. I